This is the third chapter in the decline and fall of practically everybody. Pericles. Pericles was the greatest statesman of ancient Greece. He ruled Athens for more than 30 years in its most glorious period, from 461 BC to 429 BC. Or, rather, the people ruled, for Athens was a democracy. At least that's what Pericles said it was. He only told them what to do. Strictly speaking, the age of Pericles may be said to have ended in 430 BC, when Pericles was found guilty of embezzling public funds. It was never the same after that. Pericles was called the Olympian because of his wisdom and eloquence. He was also called Squillhead or Conehead, because his head resembled a squill or sea onion, a cone-shaped vegetable found in those parts. The Greek comedians made many jests about the shape of Pericles' head. He was the only statesman they'd ever seen with his hat off. Through his mother, Agariste, Pericles belonged to the Alcmaeonidae, a rich and aristocratic family which had already produced a number of statesmen. The Alcmaeonidae were suspected of betraying Athens to the Persians, and several of them had been caught at bribery and corruption. But they had managed to live most of it down, as other Athenians were too busy living things down to give their full attention to anyone else. Agariste's uncle, Cleisthenes the Reformer, was famous for bribing the Delphic oracle. He even attempted to reform the laws of Solon, so you can see how bright he was. Solon was one of the 7 wise men of ancient Greece and a national hero. He had legalized brothels in Athens. Xanthippus, father of Pericles, was one of the 3 important statesmen of his day. The others were Aristides the Just and Themistocles. They all won lasting renown by constantly accusing one another of peculation and fraud and calling names at election time. I cannot believe that Aristides the Just stole nearly as much as Themistocles said he did. He always looked so stately and dignified. Themistocles offered an easy mark for the rougher forms of political argument, having been born out of wedlock. Eventually, they were banished from Athens as public nuisances, leaving the field to Pericles, who was to excel them all in the art of leadership. Pericles immediately banished his strongest rival, Cimon, who had achieved popularity by bringing the bones of Theseus, slayer of the Minotaur, back to Athens from the island of Skyros. As Theseus was a myth, he could hardly have had any bones. Nevertheless, Cimon brought them back. Pericles was the people's friend. The very poorest citizens had the chance to become president, but somehow they didn't. It may just have been a coincidence. He was so fond of the people that he paid them to go to the assembly and vote, and they were so fond of him that they elected him year after year. You can't say Pericles bought them up, for how could he help it if they always voted for him? Pericles was rather close with his money in other respects. He seldom had a new suit, but nothing was too good for the citizens of Athens, whom he paid out of the public treasury. As democracy means government by the people, the Athenians would gather on the Pnyx and govern. Pericles would deliver an oration, and the Athenians would yell and shout and second the motion and make treaties and declare war, and Pericles would add a few little touches to make it more binding. If it was still unconstitutional, he would fix that too. He reduced the power of the Council of the Areopagus, a group of feeble old men who held their jobs for life, and whose duty it was to declare everything null and void. He let them tend the sacred olive grove on the Acropolis. He also revoked their right to censor the private lives of citizens. This was nasty at Pericles, for about the only pleasure the old fellows had was catching some citizen doing what he shouldn't. After that, they had to use their imaginations. Pericles also paid the jurymen, who were chosen by lot and served in bunches of 401, 501, or more. As the average Athenian citizen was not awfully bright, it was necessary to have a great many of them on each jury. Sir Francis Galton says the Athenians were about twice as intelligent as we are. If you want a real laugh, though, look up Sir Francis' theory of the stirps. Those who wished to serve drew black and white beans from a large pot, and if they drew a white bean, they went right to work. They did not have to prove that they were completely ignorant before they were accepted as jurymen. That was taken for granted. Most of the minor Athenian officials were chosen by lot. The 10 generals and the superintendent of finance, however, were elected. You could hardly choose them by lot, since peculiar abilities are needed to handle a lot of money. Members of the poorest class were not eligible for these offices. They had the wrong background. The job does not sound like much fun, as you can't have any of the money yourself, but maybe you get over that or something. One notable proof of Pericles' genius was his management of the Delian League, or the Confederacy of Delos, which had been organized in 477 BC to protect the Greek cities of Asia Minor and the Aegean from the Persians. Whenever a city objected to being helped in this way, it would be made to see reason. The amount of protection was fixed by Aristides the Just, and it was so named because its membership dues, amounting annually to 600 talents, or $750,000, were kept at the shrine of the Apollo on the sacred island of Delos. Pericles knew there are always crooks around who will steal anything they can lay their hands on, so in 454 BC he removed the treasury of the Delian League to Athens, where he could keep his eye on it. Pericles found only $3,750,000 in the treasury when he should have found $35,397,500. I'm unable to explain the discrepancy. This had nothing to do with the trial for embezzlement. That was something else again. Thus, Pericles was able to make Athens the city beautiful by building the Parthenon and other things on the Acropolis and adorning them with a great deal of art. Many persons believe he built the Acropolis on the Parthenon. I have tried to think of some way of preventing this error. There is no way. The average Athenian citizen, if he so desired, could daily contemplate the most magnificent specimens of architecture, painting, and sculpture the world has ever seen. The effect of this upon the citizens was the same as the effect of art on citizens today. The Parthenon cost 700 talents, or about $875,000. Inside it was a statue of Athena Parthenos by Phidias, worth about $1,250,000. It was 40 feet in height, and was overlaid with ivory and gold. The Athenians accused Phidias of stealing some of the gold while he was making it. He had not stolen any of it, but the Athenians thought he had, because that's what they would have done. After a while, there was not nearly so much gold on Athena's draperies as there has been at first, and pretty soon the statue itself disappeared. It was not nailed down. Another form of art was the Greek drama, which consisted mostly of tragedies about Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, written by Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Pericles was very fond of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides because he couldn't see jokes either. The Greek drama was based upon well-known stories, so that one always knew what was coming next, just as one does today. Euripides passed his last years in Macedonia, his wife having fallen in love with Cephisophon, an actor. Many Greek women were mentally underdeveloped. There was also a man called Socrates who went around barefoot asking people to define their terms. He taught that good life consists in being good, and that virtue is knowledge, and knowledge is virtue. People who talk like that are called philosophers. Pericles was proud of all this Greek culture, but he cared more about his private life. He was not a society man and seldom went anywhere, because he could have more fun at home. He was very friendly with Aspasia, a lady celebrated for her beauty and wit, whom he could not marry as she was born in Miletus, and it was illegal to marry foreigners. Pericles had made that law himself in 451 BC before meeting Aspasia. He divorced his wife, Telesippe, for incompatibility, and Aspasia moved in. Back of every great man is always a woman to instruct him in something. Then he goes and does the exact opposite. Always a gentleman, Pericles provided Telesippe with another husband, her third. This made Aspasia a hetaira, or companion as they were called. Many of the Greek hetairai were extremely skillful in rhetoric, or the art of talking. As a general rule, those who talked the fastest were most likely to succeed. Lerna, a popular hetaira, was known as didrachmas, because her conversation consisted almost entirely of the Greek for 2 drachmas, or about 36 cents in our money. The women of Athens were not very happy. They stayed at home and were not allowed to talk back. This has been called the Golden Age. Aspasia believed in women's rights. That is, she thought women were as good as men, a notion that's always cropping up here and there. Indeed, we had some such movement in our own day. How did that turn out? The position of women in Athens was not perfect, but it might have been worse. A married lady was permitted to dine with her husband unless there was company, when she was expected to keep to her own quarters. At ordinary meals she sat on a chair, and he reclined on a sofa because he was all tired out discussing truth, beauty, goodness, justice, freedom, and moderation with his men friends. The Greeks did nothing to excess unless they were really crazy about it. Greek wives could not go gadding about the streets, but they could look out windows and have babies. After the age of 60, they could attend funerals. Yet many of them were dissatisfied with their lot. Women were also admitted to tragedies at the theater. They were always late. We have no statistics on the number of women in Athens, as they were not considered worth counting. The Greeks little knew what things were coming to. Since she was not respectable anyway, and could do as she chose, Aspasia ran a salon at Pericles' house. Celebrities of the day gathered there, and you could always find a group of her cronies around. Nobody special, just old friends and neighbors such as Herodotus, Sophocles, Phidias, Thucydides, Euripides, Anaxagoras, and Socrates. In addition to her other interests, Aspasia is said to have advised Pericles on political problems and to have helped in the preparation of his speeches. Theirs has been called a union of intellects. Their son was named Pericles the Younger, or Junior. He had to be legalized by a special vote of the assembly, all on account of that law his father had passed in 451 BC. Just shows you never know. The last few years of Pericles' life were none too happy. In 431 BC, in order to revive his waning popularity, he brought on the Peloponnesian War with Sparta and her allies. It lasted 27 years until both sides were completely ruined. He didn't know it was loaded. The citizens turned against him in 430 BC and fined him 50 talents, or $61,500, for stealing a little money. Then Aspasia was arrested for irreligion and immorality, but Pericles got her off with one of his speeches. A pestilence resulting from the war killed a fourth of the people, including Xanthippus and Pericles, Pericles' two legitimate sons by Telesippe, and the Peloponnesians put Junior to death. Pericles died of the plague in 429 BC, just as his war was getting into its stride. Naturally, the period of his government is called, in his honor, the Age of Pericles. During Pericles' last days, the citizens cleaned out most of the geniuses in one way or another. They hounded harmless old Anaxagoras from the city and imprisoned Phidias, who shortly died. They let Socrates live till after the war. I guess the Athenians were just folks. Aspasia never got far with her women's rights movement. As time went on, though, women were allowed to eat at the family table even if guests were present. Later still, they were permitted to cook the meal and wash the dishes afterwards. Aspasia probably had her faults, but she loved Pericles dearly. She didn't mind his being cone-headed. After his death, she was companion to Lysicles, a sheep dealer. She didn't seem to mind that either.